Fort Callahan, Arizona, sat under a sky so wide and blue it seemed to swallow the world whole. The heat shimmered off the dusty ground, making the world feel like a slow, deliberate dream. For Sergeant Clara Vance, however, life was anything but slow. She was a soldier, a marksman, and a master with her M1911A1 pistol. It was a heavy, reliable gun, a classic that had been in service for decades. Clara handled it with a quiet grace that belied her small frame. She didn't look like the kind of soldier you'd expect to be a legend on the firing range, and that was the problem. Her rival, Staff Sergeant Greg "Hammer" Harrison, was the exact opposite. He was big, loud, and he moved with a swagger that filled any room he walked into. He loved to call Clara "Little Bird" and make jokes about her size, always saying she was too delicate to handle a real American gun. Their platoon was getting ready for the annual pistol competition, a high-stakes event that determined promotions and assignments for the coming year. Everyone knew it was a race between Clara and Hammer. "You're going to need both hands to hold that thing, little bird," Hammer said with a sneer one afternoon. He was cleaning his own M1911A1, a brand-new model that looked too shiny to have ever been in a fight. "I heard they're thinking of giving you a .22 for the competition. You know, so you don't hurt your little wrists." The other soldiers laughed, but Clara didn't flinch. She just kept working, her movements precise and calm. "My wrists are just fine, Hammer," she replied, her voice low and steady. "And I'll have both hands on my M1911A1. I just won't need both to take home the prize." The competition was set for the next day. The tension in the air was as thick as the Arizona dust. Clara had a perfect score in practice all week, and she knew she was ready. She had a ritual before every competition. She would inspect her pistol, clean it, and make sure every part was exactly where it should be. She had a special connection to her gun, a bond built on thousands of hours of training. She trusted it completely. That evening, a terrible thing happened. Clara's pistol was stolen from her locker. She reported it immediately, but the base police found nothing. The next morning, a replacement M1911A1 was issued to her. It was old, worn, and had a strange feeling to it, like it had seen too many wars. It wasn't her gun. The theft was a mystery, but the timing was a bitter blow. Clara knew, deep in her gut, who was responsible, but she had no proof. When the time came to compete, Clara's heart was a drum in her chest. She stood at the firing line, the unfamiliar gun in her hand. The targets were small and far away, and the wind had picked up. She took a deep breath, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. The first shot was good. The second was a little off. The third missed the target completely. Her shots continued to go wide, and for the first time in years, she felt her confidence shake. The gun was just not right. It jammed on the fifth shot, and the range officer called for a halt. "Looks like Little Bird can't handle a real gun after all," Hammer said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. He took his turn and shot a perfect score. Clara was humiliated. The judges took her aside and gave her a stern talking to. The M1911A1 was a soldier's best friend, and she had failed it. She was pulled from her unit, her dreams of promotion shattered. The demotion came swiftly and without fanfare. She was no longer a sergeant in a top-tier platoon. She was just Clara, a soldier without a place. Her new assignment was to inventory the forgotten weapons in the oldest building on base, a place they called the Dusty Mausoleum. She walked away, her head down, the weight of the demotion heavier than any gun she had ever carried. She felt a deep, burning anger at the injustice, but more than that, she felt a profound sense of loss. She had lost her honor, her place, and a piece of her pride. The Dusty Mausoleum lived up to its name. It was an old stone building, smelling of rust and long-forgotten battles. Light barely filtered through the grime on the windows, and the air was thick with the scent of old metal. For Clara, it was a place of punishment, a dark echo of her failure. Her new job was simple: to go through every box, every crate, and every drawer, and make a list of all the weapons stored inside. The first few days were torture. The work was slow and thankless. Clara was lonely. The silence of the armory was broken only by the sound of her own footsteps and the occasional rustle of a mouse. She thought about quitting, about leaving the army and never looking back. The shame was a constant companion, a heavy blanket she couldn't shake. She knew what people were saying about her, that she wasn't tough enough, that she had choked under pressure. And every time she thought about it, a fresh wave of hurt would wash over her. One afternoon, while digging through a large, heavy crate, she found something unusual. Tucked away beneath a pile of old bayonets was a strange-looking pistol. It was small, with an odd shape and a round handle that felt unnatural in her hand. It looked like something from a movie about old wars. On the side, she saw the markings. Nambu Type 14. Clara knew a little bit about the Nambu. It was a Japanese pistol from the Second World War. The soldiers in her platoon, especially Hammer, would sometimes joke about it, calling it a cheap copy of the American Luger. They would say it was no match for the powerful M1911A1. It was a clumsy, unreliable gun, they said. Clara had never even seen one in person. She held the Nambu in her hands, turning it over and over. The old gun felt cold and sad, like it had been forgotten for a reason. She put it on the list, a single line item, then put it back in the box. But something about it kept nagging at her. The next day, she went back and pulled it out again. She took it apart, piece by piece, studying the firing pin, the magazine, the strange, complicated mechanism. It was completely different from the M1911A1. The Nambu had a delicate design, its parts fitting together like the gears of a fine watch. It was not a gun of brute force, like the M1911A1, but a gun of careful, subtle engineering. As she worked, something started to change in Clara. The sadness and shame began to fade, replaced by a quiet curiosity. She realized that she wasn't just counting old weapons. She was learning about history, about the different ways people had thought about building a weapon. She began to see the Nambu not as an inferior gun, but as a masterpiece of a different kind. It was beautiful in its own way, like a fragile flower that had survived a hurricane. She started to spend her lunch breaks with the Nambu. She would dry fire it, pulling the trigger again and again, feeling the mechanism click. She would practice holding it, getting used to its odd grip and balance. Her hands, so used to the heavy, powerful M1911A1, had to learn a new kind of discipline. She had to be more careful, more precise with the Nambu. It wouldn't forgive a mistake. Clara felt a new kind of strength growing inside her. It wasn't the loud, angry strength of a fight. It was a quiet, internal strength. She was still humiliated, still hurt, but she was no longer broken. She was fixing the pieces of herself, just as she was learning to understand the pieces of the Nambu. She was sacrificing her time and her pride, but in that sacrifice, she was finding a way forward. The dusty mausoleum was no longer a place of punishment. It was her sanctuary. The dusty mausoleum had become Clara's secret classroom. She spent every spare moment with the Nambu. She was no longer just going through the motions. She was on a mission. She had to understand this strange little pistol, to master it completely. It was her way of fighting back, her quiet rebellion. She knew that simply by existing and refusing to be broken, she was a threat to people like Greg Hammer Harrison. The Nambu was a difficult teacher. Its magazine was small, and its round was less powerful than the .45 caliber round of the M1911A1. It was a finicky gun that required a soft touch and a careful hand. Clara had to change her whole way of shooting. With the M1911A1, she had learned to rely on its weight and power, to trust that the sheer force of the bullet would make up for any small error in her aim. But with the Nambu, every shot had to be perfect. She had to become one with the gun. She began to study everything she could about the Nambu. She found old books and records in the armory. She read about the Japanese soldiers who had carried it into battle, about its strengths and its weaknesses. She learned that while it was considered a less powerful gun, its unique design meant it was also more reliable in some ways. She found that the old stories about its unreliability were mostly based on poor maintenance, not on the design itself. She felt a deep connection to the gun and its history. She saw herself in it, underestimated, but with a quiet strength that was not easily seen. One day, while cleaning the Nambu, she noticed something that she had never paid attention to before. The gun's action, the way the bolt moved back and forth, was so much more delicate than the M1911A1. It was almost like a fine instrument. She began to understand how to hold it to get the most out of it, how to cradle it in a way that made it feel like an extension of her own hand. Her emotional strength grew with her skills. The mockery and the whispers from the other soldiers still hurt, but she had a new shield. She was no longer a victim. She was a master of a skill no one else even cared about. She was a master of a gun everyone thought was useless. She was not just practicing shooting. She was practicing resilience. She was teaching herself that her worth was not defined by what others thought, but by what she knew to be true in her heart. She set up her own secret firing range behind the armory, using old crates and sandbags. She would stay late, long after everyone else had gone home, and practice with the Nambu. She would load the magazine, take her stance, and fire again and again. She missed a lot at first. The Nambu had a different kick, a different sound, but with each shot she got a little better. She started hitting her mark. She started hitting bullseyes, and one day she shot 10 straight bullseyes without even thinking about it. It was a beautiful moment. It was a moment of victory, and no one was there to see it. It was a private triumph. She felt tears come to her eyes, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of pride. She had not only survived, she had thrived. She had taken her punishment and turned it into her greatest strength. The Nambu, the gun everyone had mocked, had become her partner, her ally. Clara knew she was ready. She had a plan, and it was a simple one. She was going to wait for the right moment. She was going to wait for a chance to show them all that a soldier's strength is not just in the gun they hold, but in the heart and mind that guides it. A week later, a new challenge was announced. A high-ranking general was visiting Fort Callahan, and he wanted to see the best shooters in the division compete in a surprise live-fire exercise. It was a big deal, a chance for soldiers to prove themselves and earn a spot on an elite Special Forces team. The news spread through the base like wildfire. Clara heard about it while cleaning her Nambu in the armory. A strange calmness settled over her. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She finished cleaning the gun, then walked to the registration tent. The clerk looked at her with pity in his eyes. "You sure you want to sign up, Sergeant Vance?" he asked gently. "It's for the top guys, the best of the best." "I know," Clara said. "I'm a good shot." Hammer was there, laughing with his friends. When he saw Clara, his laughter stopped. His eyes narrowed. "Looks like Little Bird wants a second chance to choke," he said to his buddies. "You gonna use that old gun from the museum?" "Maybe," Clara said with a small smile. The day of the competition, the general stood at the viewing platform watching the soldiers get ready. The challenge was tough. They had to hit a series of moving targets from different distances, using both precision and speed. The targets would appear and disappear without warning. It was a test of skill and nerves. Hammer was up first. He walked to the firing line with his usual swagger. He held his brand-new M1911A1 like a trophy. He shot a perfect score, his powerful gun firing with a deep, confident roar. The crowd cheered. "That's how you do it," he said, looking over at Clara. Then it was her turn. A hush fell over the crowd. Clara walked to the firing line. The sun was hot on her skin. She didn't look at anyone. She just took a deep breath and took the Nambu out of its holster. A murmur went through the crowd. Some people laughed quietly. The general leaned forward, a curious expression on his face. He had never seen a Nambu in a competition before. Clara felt the weight of everyone's doubt. She felt the ghost of her past failure, but she also felt a deep sense of peace. The Nambu was in her hand. It felt right. She took her stance, raised the gun, and waited. The first target popped up. It was small and far away. She didn't hesitate. She squeezed the trigger gently. The Nambu made a soft, light sound. The target fell. The crowd went silent. The next target appeared. She shot again. It fell. She moved quickly, her hands moving with a fluid grace she had never shown before. She wasn't just shooting. She was dancing with the Nambu. She was calm, focused, and completely in control. The Nambu's small size and odd shape, the things everyone had mocked, were now her greatest strengths. She could move faster, aim more precisely. She was not a brute. She was an artist. She hit every single target. She shot a perfect score, and she did it faster than Hammer had. A few people started to clap, then more. Soon the whole crowd was cheering. The general himself stood up and clapped. He looked at Clara with a mix of awe and respect. She walked away from the firing line, the Nambu in her hand. She had done it. She had not only proven herself, but she had done it with the very gun that was a symbol of weakness and defeat. Part 5. Justice and the Powerful. Twist Clara stood on the podium, the hot sun beating down on her face. The general handed her a certificate of excellence and shook her hand. He smiled. "Sergeant Vance," he said, his voice loud and clear. "I haven't seen a display of skill like that in 20 years. You are a true master of your craft." The crowd clapped, and Clara felt a warmth spread through her. Her eyes found Hammer, who was standing at the edge of the crowd, his face pale with shock and anger. Clara took the microphone from the general. The crowd went silent, wondering what she would say. She looked out at all the faces, at the soldiers who had mocked her, at the officers who had judged her. She felt no anger, just a calm resolve. "Thank you, sir," she said into the microphone. Her voice was strong, steady. "I have to admit it was a little easier this time around. My old M1911A1 pistol wasn't working so well in the last competition." The crowd stirred, she continued. "In fact, it was broken. Someone had filed down the firing pin. It was a clever job, a difficult one to spot. The gun would fire a few times, but then it would fail. It was designed to look like a failure of the person holding it, not a failure of the gun itself." She looked directly at Greg. His eyes went wide. He started to back away. "When I was assigned to the Dusty Mausoleum," Clara said, "I found this old Nambu pistol. Everyone said it was no match for a .45, but the Nambu's firing mechanism is different. It's an exposed striker. I had to learn how it worked, how to handle it. In doing that, I learned to see the small parts of a weapon in a way I never had before. And when I had my hands on my old M1911A1, the one I had just been given back, I noticed something strange." She held up the M1911A1, the same one that had been issued to her after the theft. "The firing pin," she said, her voice clear as a bell. "Someone had filed it down to almost nothing." A gasp went through the crowd. Greg was now trying to slip away, but 2 military police officers were already heading toward him. "I realized," Clara said, looking at the general, "that the Nambu, the weakest gun, had given me the perspective to see the lie. It was a gun that required me to be a better soldier, to be more careful, more thoughtful. And it was that care, that new understanding, that allowed me to see the simple truth. The truth was, my last failure was not mine. It was a lie. And the Nambu, of all things, showed me the way to justice." The crowd erupted in a thunderous cheer. The general walked to the podium and saluted Clara. She saluted back. The 2 military police officers escorted a pale, defeated Greg away. The once great Hammer had been brought down not by a more powerful gun, but by the quiet bravery and simple truth of a soldier he had called Little Bird. Clara stood tall, the Nambu in one hand, the certificate in the other. She had come full circle, from a place of public shame to a place of profound public respect. The story of her victory would be told on Fort Callahan for years to come. The lesson wasn't about the M1911A1 or the Nambu or even the power of a gun. It was about the power of a quiet, strong heart that refused to be defeated. It was a story about justice, sacrifice, and the simple truth that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the most unexpected places.